Are you in the market for a Z370 motherboard and you don't know which one you want to get, whether it be an Aorus, an Asus, an Asrock, or an MSI motherboard? Well, you've come to the right video because today I'm going to be comparing all four against each other. We're going to go through the VRM temps, overclocking, the BIOS, the NICs, the onboard audio, and also a big request from you guys on Twitter to check out the auto overclocking features as well. So exactly who's going to be the winner? Find out at Tech Yes City. Welcome back, and here we have four mammoth Z370 motherboards from four different vendors. First up, the MSI Gaming Pro Carbon AC, which comes in at $200, or if you're in Oz, $330. So the price is a little bit off there for us Aussies, though second is the Asus Strix E, which comes in at $210 US and isn't available in Oz yet. Then there's the Asrock Z370 Gaming Professional, which is $270, though for what it's worth, the Z370 Taichi is the exact same thing, minus the 10 gigabits per second Ethernet port, and that comes in at 210 or 270 Aussie. So it's very well priced in Australia in terms of triple P. Then the last competitor we have is the Courageous, and I say that deliberately because they, and that's Aorus, wanted me to put their $140 Ultra Gaming board up against the rest. They were confident it could compete, and you gotta respect that, though the Aussie pricing is a little off, costing 250 Australian in comparison. Though, let's get this show on the road, and first up, the VRMs and temperatures. Here we use the i7-8700K at 5 GHz and an AIDA64 stress test for at least 10 minutes to warm up those heat sinks, and really all boards scored roughly the same here as I tested throughout the day, with slight variations in ambient temperatures. First up, the Asrock came in with its impressive 12-phase VRM at 70.8 degrees at 28 degrees ambient at 1.33 volt and level 1 max LLC, drawing around 185 watts total from the wall. And since the AIDA readings were inaccurate for this motherboard, in particular, I used hardware monitor, which showed the voltages were, all pun intended, rock solid. This board also managed to get a stable 5.1 GHz at 1.4 volt, winning the max OC as well as overclocking to 5 GHz with the lowest voltage measured in hardware monitor post-stress testing. The Asus Strix E, however, came in very close with a 1.34 volt stable at 5 GHz at level 6 LLC, which is the second highest, on its smooth 10-phase VRM. Wattage was very similar to the Asrock board, and VRM temperatures maxed out at 68.9 degrees at 26 degrees ambience, so virtually the same. And lastly, this board managed to pull the 8700K into 5.1 GHz at 1.42 volt. And then next up, we had the Aorus Ultra Gaming coming in with also a smooth, criminalistic 1.34 volt at 5 GHz with a turbo, which essentially means the max level, more on this later, LLC setting, and also being able to hit 5.1 GHz at 1.42 volt. The VRM temperatures were 68.8 degrees at 26 degrees ambience on its 8-phase VRM. So wattage from the wall and temperatures were virtually identical to the other two. Last up, we have the MSI Gaming Pro Carbon AC coming in with its 10-phase VRM and being able to hit 5 GHz at 1.35 volt with an LLC of level 4. Overclocking was a little strange on the 8700K on this board. I only just managed to hit 5 GHz stable, and it did so with only drawing an extra roughly 10 watts from the wall, so it did fall slightly behind the other three boards here, and it couldn't hit 5.1 GHz on the Corsair H110i cooler no matter what I did with it. VRM temperatures, however, were quite good, coming in at 65.1 degrees at 24 degrees ambience. So for this first segment, Asrock does score a slight victory here, having a 12-phase VRM that delivers slightly better on the overclocks with albeit the same heat and wattage, which all factors equal is a slightly better thing, though all four boards were good for a manual 5 GHz overclock on a delidded i7-8700K. Now on to part 2. Here we're going to take a look at the BIOS settings and the performance on these boards, and they all showed Cinebench scores that were all roughly the same, and the memory latency timings showed the same too, so nothing to really gain in terms of hidden performance by buying one motherboard over the other at the same clock settings. However, I will say that the M.2 slot provided by the Asus Strix E did actually work, and it worked exceptionally well, dropping the NVMe SSD temperatures running on full load after 10 minutes by a whopping 20 degrees. Great to see an implementation of this that actually works. The MSI M.2 shield, on the other hand, actually increased temperatures by roughly 4 degrees, and not to mention it's right near where a hot GPU backplate would be sitting and stuck in between a CPU and its cooler. This does need some improvement, MSI, so I'd like to see this fixed in a future release. Though Asus does get props for implementing something that not only works really well, but also looks very pleasing too. The other two boards from Asrock and Aorus just had naked NVMe slots, which gives the victory to Asus here. Asus also has the option to mount a fan, a 40mm one, over the VRM heatsink too, with the VRM bracket included. There is also a CPU installation help kit to guide your CPU in, especially handy if this is going to be your first D-lid. Though what about all the different BIOSes? This is where the Asus and Asrock boards scored a victory here, having all the settings I could personally want and also having the option to quickly and easily update your BIOS via a routed internet connection. All four boards have backup BIOSes, and it was impressive to see that the BIOS update methods on all four boards manually reset your PC, revert to safe default settings, and then update, which is a general improvement all round. Though I'd like to see both MSI and Aorus offer the option to update the BIOS via internet in the future. The overclocking settings on the Aorus 2 were quite tedious. Some of the vocabulary used could definitely use some work. Changing things like the LLC labeling to levels from 1 to 5, for example, with diagrams would be great to help first-time overclockers instead of just having standard, turbo, and rocket boost settings as the labels. Though MSI did score some props here for having everything you need to overclock all on the same tab. This is very easy for first-time overclockers, and I found locking in the settings here were quick and easy, so the MSI BIOS is great for you guys if it's your first 8700K or your 8600K and you're going to get into overclocking. Though switching gears over to the Asus board, it had an extra feature that I noticed, and that was live memory overclocking, which is very useful for people trying to fast track a high memory overclock. Since memory overclocks usually just have a bar, if you are over that bar, you're stable, under, and your system will freeze. So nice addition on the Strix E. Last up, we have Asrock. Here we have the simplicity mixed in with detail. Asrock BIOSes always offer everything I need with laid out descriptions. The offset setting I found is great for stability too on the 8700K at 5.1 GHz, and they offer the RGB lighting control direct from the BIOS itself, so you don't need to install any extra apps. And lastly, smart fan control across all four boards was exceptional here too. Though segueing into this next test is one that you guys requested I do on Twitter, the auto overclocking. Here the winner was Aorus with their Gaming Ultra board. I lucked in the 5 GHz auto OC setting, and to my surprise this worked first go, and it was completely stable. Albeit the voltage was at 1.39 volt versus 1.34 volt, so it was roughly 50 millivolt higher than the manual tune, but it was the only board here to lock in a usable 5 GHz stable off the auto OC feature. The Asus board did have a 5 GHz feature too, but I found the clocks were all over the place and the Cinebench score reflected this as well, so this will probably get better in a future BIOS update. However, there was an easy tuning function, and this was interesting to say the least. When I opened it up, it had 3 different settings, and I found that the actual box cooler setting included was the one that worked, and it worked extremely well. The water cooler and the air coolers actually crashed the computer, so they weren't stable at all, but the box cooler setting managed to lock in a 4.95 GHz overclock, which was stable, and it worked really well. Then next up we had Asrock with their 5 GHz auto OC. They also had different settings as well, going from 4.4 to 4.8, and the 5 GHz overclock was just simply way too high for me to be comfortable with. It threw the voltage up to 1.5 volt, and out of the wall it was juicing way too much wattage. So although stable, it was a potential CPU melting stable, one which I can't recommend at all. The 4.8 GHz auto OC, however, was rock stable at 1.39 volt, so it was overvolting the CPU way too much, but that said, however, this 4.8 GHz should work on any 8700K. I don't imagine one that it wouldn't work on. The MSI board also had their auto overclock feature labeled as Game Boost, and upon turning that on, it got to Windows and started to stress test and then going back down to 4.4 GHz, so it was ultimately just a 100 MHz boost. This also showed up in the Cinebench scores as well. Very odd, as in the previous generation I am positive that it was MSI's board that hit the most amazing auto overclock I've seen in my life. This got my 7700K to 5 GHz at pretty much the manual overclock settings that I locked in myself, so I mean, MSI, if you fire that guy doing the overclocks in your BIOS division, you need to bring him back. Please, he did some amazing work last generation. Though anyway, surprisingly, the lowest cost board here came in with the best auto overclock, so kudos to Aorus. I guess that confidence is starting to build up a little bit. Now it's time to talk about aesthetics, audio, and extra features. And aesthetics is really going to be subjective. I'm going to say just take a look at the B-roll and see which one looks best for you. I honestly love the RGB lighting on the Aorus. It looks gorgeous at night, though it does come at the expense of having no AC wireless, unlike the other three boards here, and also there is no clear CMOS on the back, so some features have been sacrificed for that spicy lighting, though the audio was very good, having roughly minus 80 decibels of crosstalk. And all motherboards had very low crosstalk, and they're all pretty much using the same Realtek ALC1220 despite the naming differences. Though the differences here in the crosstalk itself between the Asus, Aorus, and Asrock boards is that they all had a slight leaking of crosstalk at a volume level over 90. And then the MSI board exhibited this same leaking at a volume level over 95. So basically keep the volume at 90 or under if you're on one of the AAA motherboards, and 95 and under if you're on the MSI board. Frequency response curves showed that all four boards were exceptional here, with under 10 Hz only having roughly a minus 3 decibel drop off. This is the sub bass, so you shouldn't even notice it, and it shouldn't be any different to normal headphones unless you like some shake in your headphones, which I do. As for RGB control, they all have their own apps for controlling RGB lighting. However, Asus does have the widest supported options with the Aura Sync lighting and has two headers for 5V and 12V options. Though as for the mic inputs, I will let you guys have a listen. We're going to start this microphone test off with the V-Motor Boom Pro plugged directly into the Z370 Asrock Fatal1ty Gaming Pro with a volume level of 85 and plus 10 dB. So here's the Z370 Strix motherboard. I'm just going to quickly stop the fans manually with my hands, and you guys can hear if there's any noise. Here's a sound test on the Z370 Carbon Pro AC from MSI with the V-Motor Boom Pro at the same levels as you heard before. Here's a quick mic test on the Z370 Aorus Ultra Gaming motherboard with a volume level of 80 and plus 10 decibels. And as stated before, the Aorus board doesn't carry wireless unfortunately, though the MSI Carbon series has an add-in PCIe wireless, and the Strix E and Fatal1ty boards carry this on board with their AC and Bluetooth features. All three had strong signal strength to boot, connecting to my router with all having 5 bars at 2.4 GHz and all having 3 bars at 5 GHz. The router is roughly 10 meters away on the floor below, so it does have to travel through a few walls. All four boards carry programs to adjust things like RGB lighting and adjust clocks in Windows if you wish to as well. This is where as well the DPC latency app from MSI adds to simplicity on overclocking with the MSI boards. Though ultimately for this category there really isn't a winner, it's more a subjective thing, though I will say the Asrock board does have dual onboard 1GB NICs even on the Taichi, and in the case of the Fatal1ty it has a further third NIC that is 10 gigabits per second, which at a $70 premium over the Taichi isn't bad going at all, though the people who would utilize this I am sure are far and few. However, one thing the Asrock board does have, which I love, is a clear CMOS button. The other three boards don't have this on the rear, and this is honestly the best spot for this button, especially once you put all your components in a case and you want to start overclocking. There is also a debug LED readout that can double down as a CPU temperature readout, which I found is really cool in operation. And lastly, compatibility on all four boards was fine with the Corsair 16GB 2x8 kit that I used, and I did use the latest BIOS revisions before testing these boards throughout the 12th and 13th of November 2017. So now it's time for the conclusion. Which Z370 should you buy? Which is the best? Well, they are all good for an overclocked 8700K, and they all have exceptionally good onboard audio and performed well at 5 GHz with a 3 GHz XMP Corsair memory kit, though they all have their strengths and weaknesses. First off, the Aorus Ultra Gaming. Budget friendly, impressive aesthetics in my opinion, solid auto OC which took this to 5 GHz, and also max manual overclock did hit 5.1 GHz too. However, BIOS features and labeling could use some improvement, and there is also no wireless on board the chipset itself. Next up is the Strix E, intricate BIOS and some features not seen on the other three boards. great manual overclocking, and the M.2 heatsink worked exceptionally well. 5.1 GHz was also obtainable too. However, the 5 GHz auto OC and also some of the easy tuning features could use some touching up, and it was quite wonky, and I'm sure Asus will update this soon. However, the first auto OC option did work really well, scoring 4.95 GHz, so coming very close to the Aorus board, though RGB options and the aesthetics were also smooth too. Third in line, we have the MSI Gaming Pro Carbon AC. This had the strength of having a very beginner-friendly BIOS. Great if it's your first time overclocking manually, and also the apps in Windows make this super easy too. Included PCIe wireless is nice. You can port this over to future builds or sell it separately if you don't need it. However, the implementation of the VRM and the power delivery was slightly behind the other three boards, I thought, just slightly. And I managed to hit 5 GHz stable, though 5.1 GHz wasn't obtainable. And the Game Boost Auto OC was near useless, only giving an extra 100 MHz over a stock 8700K factory clock. And the included M.2 shield made temperatures of the M.2 SSD hotter, so that definitely needs to get fixed. Now last up we have the Asrock Fatal1ty Professional, and as I said before, however, I will be basing this off the Taichi, which I feel is more practical for most people. It was the most expensive at $210, however it was the winner in today's comparison, at least for me. And I'm not saying this because they're a channel sponsor. Asrock have been completely on point with their motherboards since the X99 days. This Z370 is no different. Feature-packed and all about control, it has a 12-phase VRM, and the BIOS is awesome to work with, and you even have the option to control your RGB and other options that just make sense for overclockers looking to get the most out of their CPUs on either air or water overclocks without breaking the bank. The Auto OC feature also worked third best in this comparison, with the 4.8 GHz being a stable medium. However, Asrock, you need to fix that 5 GHz Auto OC setting, as it was locking in some very dangerous settings, which I can't recommend anyone put in. Though that aside, a clear CMOS button and a handy debug LED that can double down as a CPU temp readout. Oh, it also has 3 M.2 slots to boot. Anyway guys, that's it for today and also last night's Z370 comparison. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to hit that like button. This one took me a long time to do. Also, if you have any comments about today's video, or you have any comments on overclocking in general, then drop a comment in the comment section below. A lot of people are pretty experienced around here. They'll be able to help you out straight away. If not, I'll be sure to drop a reply in myself. Or if you want to ask me a question directly, you can follow me on Twitter. I usually reply pretty quickly there. And with that aside, let me know in the comments too, what was your favorite board out of today's comparison and why. I love reading your comments as always, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.